Welcome to Pirate Living Podcast. We're your hosts, Karan and Kristen. On this podcast, we are highlighting ordinary people living extraordinary lives. These are pirates who take small, bold actions daily to create social change. Pirate life is all about rebelling and breaking the rules for good. Creating lasting social change starts by first breaking our inner rules. After all, the hardest rules to break are your own. The pirates we highlight have dedicated themselves to creating good trouble.
Today, we are chatting with Aaron Jannetti. Aaron is a leader who has been living life by his own code, and it shows in the community he has built around himself. He is the owner and head instructor of Endeavor Defense and Fitness, and he has written a book and leads programs on how to survive an active shooter mass violence event. Aaron has stepped past fear and he's stepped past fear and is taking on the unknown. And now he guides others on how to do the same. And we are pleased to be chatting with you today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be
I don't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me?
I know I do.
There we go. I said I'm very excited. This is great.
Yeah, we're thrilled. And you've been boldly going to the edges of the map and finding those dragons to slay. So will you weave us a tale of what started you on your pirate journey?
Yeah. Man, that's a good question. Like, where do you start with that? I would say I tell people this all the time. The biggest turning point in my life was actually finding Krav Maga, which is it's a hand-to-hand combat system, self-defense system. There's a lot of fun ways you can spin it. At the end of the day, it's a martial art. When I discovered Krav Maga, I was in college, so I was at the Ohio State University here in Columbus, Ohio, and I was in a relatively bad place. I was running out of money. I was paying my own way through college. I was running out of money. My grandfather, who was a huge guiding light, father figure, moral figure in my life, had passed away a couple months prior. Recent breakup with it was just like everything, I guess, bad that could happen to a 20-year-old that was more emotionally traumatic than actually like the world is actually collapsing around me. But to me, it did seem that way. Was all happening about the same time. And I tell people that I was going to fight somebody, probably multiple people. And the fact that I found a place that allowed me to have an outlet for that and put me on a different path was good. My father, let's just say, wasn't the best. He wasn't around much. You can go through very, what I would say, common story of, he let's just say he had his own personal issues and he wasn't the greatest role model as things went. So I had a lot of spite dad issues, bearing the anger of the young man that is, I imagine, very common in a lot of places. And so I happen to be watching, there's an old show called Fight Quest, where these two guys would go do random martial arts and they'd film a whole thing on it. It was a pretty cool show. There happened to be an episode on Krav Maga, and there was a commercial for a place called Ohio Krav Maga, which is a local training facility. And so I was like, all right, screw it. I'm going to go do that. That looks like fun. I get to hit things. And I went and took my intro and I never left. I gave them money I didn't have. So it was like, as I was writing the check for my membership, I was like, well, it's either this or pay rent this month. And well, shit, I'll just do this and figure rent out later. But that was the best decision I have ever made in my life. That was my first step on a path that would literally bring everything good in life. I met my wife because of that. I got into business because of that. I've created a reputation and a resume and a career because of that. I discovered Strong Coach because of that, which then led me to discover Mark England and the Enlifted program because of that. And then because of that, I've learned to shape, the way that I approach language and, get into the idea of setting your own codes. And because of that, I've become a significantly better father and leader and mentor and everything. And you can trace it back to that one decision. I was I was angry enough at the time that I could have very easily been the same story of the angry kid that ends up dropping out of college, moving back to his hometown, not really doing too much with his life, pissed off, drinking way too much. That could have very easily been me. And, I was, the fact that I made that decision when honestly, I didn't really have the knowledge to know why I was making the decision, or that it would literally be the biggest life-changing decision ever. That was a big deal. And that is honestly one of the things that I truly believe. I've been asked this question numerous times, like, why do you do what you do, and put so much time into what you do, teaching self-defense and fitness and leadership and doing mentorship, and then eventually doing story work and things like that. And honestly, I truly genuinely believe it's because a simple gym and one class took me from a very potentially shitty place in life and allowed me to build a life that I am just ecstatic about. You know what I mean? And so to be able to present that to people moving forward, to me, that's the biggest driving factor. That definitely is the foundation of everything going there. So what led me on that path was that if you go back and you understand pirate history in general, right, it was usually the outcasts that were, pissed off and angry with the norm and all that type stuff. And they make some crazy ass decision early on and sets them on a path, and they stick around long enough to, be embodied in that community. I mean, that was my decision in that own right. I mean, to the point that, I dropped out of college because I was offered a job running their next facility for $1,000 a month. So I dropped out of college to make $1,000 a month working, I don't know, probably 65 to 70 hours. I lived at that place. And to me, it was like, yeah, this makes obvious sense. Why would I keep going over here and potentially become a landscape architect and go down that whole entire path when I can make $1,000 a month fighting people and, teaching people how to lift weights? So yeah, that is without a doubt the moment that changed my life.
That's cool. Tell us a bit. Sorry, we're all congested today.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So tell us about what you do. Tell us about your business. What you have to offer.
Yeah, I've got the primary thing. So I have a brick and mortar business here in Columbus, Ohio, technically in Hilliard, which is west side of Columbus, and we're a training facility. So inside of our training facility, we have a full-blown CrossFit program. So I affiliated with CrossFit back in 2008, August 2008. We've been an affiliate ever since. So we have a CrossFit affiliate. The other side of the gym, we do self-defense. So generally rooted in the system of Krav Maga, which is what I came up in. We also have a full-blown Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu program. We have fight conditioning classes. We do steel mace classes. And so that's the brick and mortar business. We have an incredible community over there. They pay a monthly enrollment. They get access to all the programs and the classes. We connect with them, as much as we absolutely can, a lot deeper than, when I first started, especially after all the Enlifted and Strong Coach stuff. Like our communities got really tight. So it's been incredible. So that's the brick and mortar business here in Columbus. And then off of that, for a while, I was working for an organization called USKMA, which is the United States Krav Maga Association. And I started, that's the organization I started first traveling and teaching seminars and certifications with. And so I worked for them, and that got me, that got my feet wet and going out into the world and going to other gyms and other towns and other cities and actually leading training, which, again, a lot of that can trace back to a gentleman by the name of Mark Slane, who was my first Krav Maga instructor. He really took me under his wing. He showed me how to run a brick and mortar business. And, 60 to 70% of what I do now is exactly from him teaching me how to do that and me eventually doing it on my own. And then, he took me out and showed me how to run seminars and build a curriculum and a lesson plan for that type of stuff. So I taught there for a little while. As a lot of things do, we saw things a little bit differently. So we eventually parted ways. And then I started going out and teaching my own seminars and things like that. So there's another side of what I do where I travel across the country. I've taught in a couple other countries as well. But I travel across the country into other states, and I teach very specific trainings to things that I've been passionate about and researched and had a lot of time with. As was mentioned early on in this, one of those big programs was our active shooter response course, where we go into communities and businesses and we do hands-on training. So a lot of training you'll find in those regards is very theoretical. It's usually a PowerPoint presentation, maybe a couple of loose mock-up drills. And because it's an independent program, so I can pretty much do whatever I want and live by whatever code I want. Ours is very hands-on. So when I say hands-on, when we do evasion drills, like we talk about running or evading, like we have you sprinting and we're firing off blank guns and we're addressing certain situations. When we talk about medical care, like we have huge med kits and we have people, fake traumas, and we learn how to actually deal with the traumas. When we do fighting, like we fight. This guy's got a gun, go into it. We build full scenarios. So we usually run 4 to 6 hour programs with that. And that is very active, very hands-on. And it's for all levels. It's all accessible. That's what eventually led me to write the book, which is be the other side of things, which is the educational lecture and authoring side. And then one of the other programs that right now is really taking off. And we've been able to really develop a program that's very, very niche and also very necessary, is a program that I originally developed called Knife Control Concepts, which is a way to teach people, whether they're instructors or end users, how to deal with somebody attempting to actually stab them. And more importantly, how to practice doing that, because that's a very intimate, very aggressive place to be at. There's a lot of physical and also psychological elements that go into that. So you have to spend a lot of time doing it. And so the system is built to teach people how to practice that continually. So I have the brick and mortar business here in Columbus, and then kind of a separate business where I go off and I teach, essentially representing myself in these other programs. And then I also do educational lecture series. I have one book I've authored, and then I'm in the process of outlining 2 other books I want to author. So that's the 3-prong approach to what Aaron Jannetti's up to these days.
Nice. Well, the practicing, like you were saying with the knife defense, practicing is very important, continuously, because you can get the idea in your head of this is what I do, but if the practicing and getting that muscle memory is important.
Yeah. And it's often overlooked, specifically in our industry. A lot of people that do traveling seminars and things like that, it's like they show up, and again, it's the business model. It's normal. We like to go a little bit deeper. You show up, you put in your 2 hours or your 4 hours or your 6 hours, you engage, you take your paycheck, you go, and you never really see these people again. In a lot of cases, there are definitely programs that have better connection. In a lot of places, you're going to go take a 6-hour seminar and then you're never going to see that instructor ever again, unless you go out to find them. And we all know this, think about the first time you went through core language upgrade, or the first time you went through the Enlifted program. You're in it, and it's even broken up very well, where it's a daily pattern that you can break up and you can digest. But even in that style of breaking it up, you're really only going to absorb, 20 to 50% of what's actually happening, for 2 reasons. One, you're taking in a ton of information. And then 2, you're not ready, negation acknowledged. You haven't gotten to the point where you're ready for the next level of understanding. Right. So then you go through the whole thing, and then you go back and go through it the second time. You're like, holy shit, how did I miss that the first time? And then you get through that whole entire thing, and you go out and you practice it, and you go listen to it a third time, and you're like, what the fuck? It's just, it's every time you revisit it, you get more out of it.
Fifth.
Yeah.
And it's back when,
what is this?
And it's back when, Mark's got his his
Ponytail?
Cute little button ups and his little part, over the side. He's not even the same person, yet the information is that impactful every time you visit it. So that's one of the major places where we shine with that program specifically. Is the program is teaching you the things, but more importantly, it's teaching you how to practice the things so that when you're done, you keep getting better at it, continually moving forward, which has been really exciting. And it was, we stumbled upon that on a happy accident, because I was working with a third-party protection group that literally looked at me and was like, we're going to train with you once a month, and then we're not going to train ever again. And I was like, oh my God, I hate you guys. So, all right, here, what if I can get you to work out 5 minutes before a shift? And they were like, well, we're going to be in suits. And I was like, you'll barely sweat. Just give me 5 minutes. And they were like, okay, cool. And so I developed a system of essentially flow drills and stuff for those guys. And it ended up working out quite well for everybody else in the end. So
what led you down that path of like, active shooter? Sorry, I don't know the language. I'm Canadian. We don't have those.
Hey, I've actually taught active shooter seminars in Canada. So
did you? Oh,
yeah.
Wonderful. Must have been Alberta or something.
Where was it? It was just outside of Banff.
Yeah, Alberta.
Yeah, exactly. So it was over. Yeah, I taught like 2 out there. Yeah. So
nice.
yeah, you'll have
that. So what? Sorry for Mike Schwartz, our one Alberta listener.
It's all good.
So what got you down that path to begin with?
Yeah. So I've always been intrigued and interested in helping people approach and prepare for violence. And I'm not sure I've yet to discover exactly what that is. I'm sure it's elements of like, my dad wasn't super abusive, but he smacked us around a little bit. And then from what I understand, there were some elements of him and my mother. I was a little bit too young at that time. It could have been that I grew up near Youngstown, and in Youngstown, there's, especially the time that I was living there's a lot more violence going on. So you're just used to hearing about people getting shot and muggings and all that type of stuff. And then, you go to Ohio State and, there's large campuses, there's violence. So, you read about, people getting attacked and, rape victims and armed robbery and all that type of stuff. So I imagine some of it's there. I imagine there was an element to the way I viewed my grandfather, and then like the element of wanting to protect my mother and like all those things. So I imagine there's something in there. I've always been very passionate about helping people prepare for violence. What that violence looks like ebbs and flows depending on the community that you're in, and not even just the community you're in, but the context you're coming from. And so with the ASR program, the active shooter response program, late 2015 is when you had the San Bernardino attacks in California, followed very, very quickly by the Paris attacks, or actually vice versa. So like the Bataclan Theater and the choreographed terrorism attacks in Paris at the same time. So we had been doing school shooter active violence seminars. I had been involved with them in some form since about 2009. And they were usually once a year, maybe twice a year. So they were, they started off as, the old days of going postal. So it was like workplace violence. And then it started shifting in, like to active shooters in schools. So then you had school violence. So that was kind of where we went. So we always adjusted to wherever it was at. But the number was low enough that very few people thought it was necessary. So there was a very low demand for it. Those 2 events happening back to back, especially as the later half of 2015, you happen to see an uptick in shootings in general. And there's also media coverage, which that's when we really started like knowing everything that was happening everywhere. There was I think it was the first time, in my opinion, that a larger subsection of the community started to realize like, shit, I'm not ready for this. I literally have no plan. And the more we're seeing this happen, and more we're realizing that the general culture around the fact that, well, law enforcement will come save us, they're not going to get there fast enough yet. So we offered a class completely for free. We actually did it right after the San Bernardino attacks. We opened one up to the community in Hilliard, and we tried to get it out everywhere we could. At the time, Facebook was a lot more popular than Instagram. So we were blasting Facebook, and we had a pretty big turnout. There's about 50 people, I think. And it was just it was like a Tuesday night. It wasn't even anything like, hey, this is a Saturday seminar. It was like the next day, hey, look, boom, we're going to put this out there. And we had a huge turnout and we had a ton of really good questions. And it did two things. It made us realize like there's a lot of faces in here. We've been in this community, in some form or fashion for over a decade. And yet there's a lot of people here that had no idea we were here. And for the first time, they're trusting us, coming to us very vulnerable with this idea that they don't know what's going on, and they're trusting us with being able to direct them. And so that did two things. That made us realize like, oh shit, like this is a completely different demographic of people. Prior to it, the people that showed up for an active shooter or a mass violence event, they were already training in most cases. So they already kind of had a little bit of an inkling. It was very rare that it was like, I've never done anything before. I've never even thought about the fact that this is possible to me. And now you have this huge change in that. And as I mentioned, that did a couple of things, but the two major ones were like, it was the first time in a while, I should say, where I had a moment like in the middle of it that was like, oh shit, like these people are coming in vulnerable and wanting answers, and I may not have the answers they want. It really put me on the spot with that, and kind of had me in a vulnerable spot, which is good. It challenges you, it forces you to grow. And two, it also challenged the way we were coaching, because we were coaching with the intent of, oh, well, these people eventually come back and train. And we kind of realized very quickly, like, shit, that can't happen. So we had to make some very quick adjustments on that. So then you have the second attack that happens very shortly after. And we did it again. I was like, look, we're going to do, anybody can come for free the next couple of days into a self-defense class. And then on Saturday, we're going to host this, 4-hour deep dive into active shooter. Well, a buddy of mine, very good friend of mine, very talented videographer. His name is Ward Heine. And he was one of my instructors at the time. And he said, hey, can my group come in and videotape this and make a little like mini documentary out of it? And I was like, sure, man, this is awesome. Whatever. At the time, I didn't realize exactly what his background was and what he was doing. It's like one of those things where you're like, he films stuff. I don't know what that means. But you don't really know what they do. Well, it turns out he worked for a company called For the Record. And For the Record was oftentimes picked up by oh my gosh, I just totally drew a blank. Like Rush Limbaugh, and like a very, very specific subsect of the community, however, a very popular subset. So this would be like the biggest driving force. So essentially the Blaze picked up a lot of their content. So they came in, they filmed 4 hours of a training that we ran. And then they asked me if they could come back and interview me the next day and ask me some questions. They came back and filmed an hour of that. And they took essentially like 5.5 hours of footage and crammed it into I believe it was like 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And it was the very first time, I don't know if y'all have ever had experience with like somebody from the media coming to cover something that you absolutely love, and they just slaughter the message. Like you're like, you missed everything I was trying to get done here. And this was the first time that somebody on that level, like they hit it on the head. And it also gave me a huge amount of respect. I was like, holy crap, how do you take 5.5 hours of footage and pull out the exact 3.5 minutes that you needed to make this like such a powerful impact? So long story short, they put that video up there and it blew up. We had in 24 hours, we had more shares, views, downloads, and comments than any video the Blaze had ever put up in the history of the Blaze on the internet. We were at like millions of views and all this type of stuff, and it was like overnight. So literally the next day, we're getting barraged with phone calls and emails, hey, can you bring this to our community? Do you teach this out in different states? And so if, where I'm going back to this is I'm very passionate for teaching people how to prepare themselves. And now all of a sudden we have this massive demand for something that we do that's a lot more unique than the way other people approach it. And so we didn't have a program like that. It did not exist. So the logical answer when somebody calls and says like, hey, can you do this thing? And you don't have the product is, yeah, fuck yeah, I can. And you make the product, right? So in 2016, I taught 83 seminars in more than 30 states on active shooter. And I took every other person and company's active shooter course that I could attend. I read every book that was potentially out there on it. I went back and researched everything. So I immersed myself for an entire year, both actively from a teaching standpoint and from an educational standpoint, into that topic. And it was a beautiful thing that happened because I was almost every single week interacting with, anywhere from 10 to 100 people, and getting into that. You talk about feedback. We were constantly getting feedback, constantly getting questions. What about this? What about this? What about this? Hey, I don't agree with this. Hey, have you heard of this? And so you talk about a course that in the beginning of 2016, the very first seminar we did was the first week of January in Medford, Oregon. So literally 365 days. And then the final one we did was like December, 29th or something like that. But they didn't look at all the same. The course that I taught that got covered by the Blaze, by the time we got to December of 2016 was you couldn't recognize it. And it was because thousands of people were there trying it and helping us change it. So as every edition became better and more fine-tuned and could connect with people, and we threw drills out and we added new drills and we went from there. And the feedback that we were getting, where people are going like, man, thank you so much for this. It's really opened my eyes. Now I'm going to go do this thing, and I'm going to go do this thing. And man, I had these conversations with my kid, and we had like 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old kids in these classes that are like, I'm going into my school and they're telling me to hide over in the corner, but I've decided that these are the things that I'm going to do. And I'm going to make sure that I'm safe. And I understand, like, it's just, I mean, you talk about that can impact. Whew. And so, we kept with it. And then, as most things do, unfortunately, the more that it's around, the more people get used to it. And the more people get used to it, the less they start realizing, or thinking rather, that they need to prepare for it. And just like anything off, all of a sudden, interest and demand for training started to die down. Actually, it was really interesting because then corporate, which they're usually a couple years behind anyway, but large corporations then, as public community events, or I should say demand started to shrink, all of a sudden all these large corporations were like, hey, we should probably update the way we approach this. And so we went into that. And then in 2017, I wrote the book. So
What's your book called?
It's called How to Survive an Active Shooter, an honest look at your role in the age of mass violence. And so the entire book is about, accountability and preparedness, and the struggle physically and psychologically to prepare yourself. And it's a very, I use that term honest very frequently in that book because, negation, acknowledge, I don't pull any punches in there. We talk about some very, very deep stuff. Like as a school teacher, you can relate. We talk about like, hey, look, if you're standing toe to toe with a 13-year-old and they have the intention of killing you, you have to at least understand that you needing to kill that person may be an option, even though it goes against everything you've been taught and trained to nurture that child and try to help them. That's the reality of it. That doesn't mean that you're capable of doing it. It doesn't mean that you have to do it. It doesn't mean that's the exact answer, but you should understand that if you're going to take an honest look at how to defend yourself and potentially defend a classroom of kids, you have to understand that, or at least you get to choose to. So there's a lot of moments in that book that are either going to create change or create resentment, most likely towards me. And that's fine. But like I said, the beauty of, living the code that you want to live, and in this case, only having myself to answer to at the end of it, is we could be very have a lot of, let's just say it's high candor. There's a lot of gumption in that book. So then kept doing that, and I still do it a little bit. I've got a company just reached out to me the other day that they have 100 employees and they want to go through it, and I'll do that. Unfortunately, demand drops off, and so as a pirate, you roll with the punches and you move on to the next thing. and help anybody that can hand out. So that's the long-winded story of I love helping people. I truly, truly do. And I'm super passionate and very knowledgeable in this area because I've spent so much time doing it. And so if somebody wants the information and they're willing to take it, I'm all over it. And it was a very special project because it allowed me to interact with people that normally wouldn't come seek our advice or seek our help. It was very, very, very interesting. And it was actually fun after I got through level 2 in Lifted. It's like heading into level 3. I literally was on a call with Mark and I was like, dude, I said, I've been posting excerpts from my book and realizing how many fucking like negations and projections are in this book. And I'm just sitting there going like, great, now I got to rewrite the entire manuscript. So I told him, I was like, one of my projects for the next like 2 years is to rewrite it and call it like How to Survive an Active Shooter, the Hope Edition. Like, I'm just going to change all of the conflict language that's in there. And it's interesting, but yeah.
Yeah. You've mentioned a few times the code that you've created. I'm curious, what has come about as you've been doing all these things?
Yeah. Man, that's a great one. I don't think I realized early on in life, when you're younger, I don't think you realize like whether you like it or not, you have a code. You might not realize you do. You make decisions based off these principles, and the more you actually know what they are and control them, the better off, you control the future. Because I started to realize, later on in life, as I understood language and things like that, about like, oh shit, like I made a lot of decisions based off these codes, but I didn't realize that they were the codes that I had set. And I also made a lot of really dumb decisions based off those codes. So when I started, I've always had a bit of a rebellious, go against the grain personality. You can talk to my mother about that. Like I was the kid that skateboarded and constantly got his skateboard confiscated by the cops, and did all the dumb stuff. I was the kid that everybody in school was dressed one way, and so I was the dude that was fucking dyeing his hair and wearing like different things. So I always had a little bit of that. My mom always, I remember like the one time I was like, have you no shame? And I was like, no, I don't. And you know what? Like, I'm going to run with that. So I ran to the beat of my own drum, but that beat, unfortunately, was a very angry beat for a very long period of time. So when I started figuring that out and harnessing like my rebellious side for good, it's really become about, figuring what it is I cared about most. And whether I realized it or not, it usually centered around family, sometimes to a fault, and the people that I'm closest to in what at the time would have been like business relationships and like the community around martial arts and things like that, which is built into martial arts in general, usually, hopefully. But I also had these codes. A lot of them were influenced by my grandfather. So you want to talk about some deep story work when we were going through and Lifted and things like that. Like my stories around where I had put my grandfather on a pedestal. And then honestly, Strong Coach, one of the biggest, I remember after the first week of Strong Coach telling Mike Bledsoe, like, the $5,000 I paid for this course, I would have given you that for the first journaling exercise. That journaling exercise where you have to, you talk about victim mentality and what you learned from your mother about victim suffering and that type of stuff, or sacrifice rather, and what you learned about your father. Holy crap with that one. Because like coming out of that one, I started to realize like, wow, like a lot of my decisions were made off the fact that I had my mother and my grandfather on such a high pedestal, and my mother and my grandfather were very, very sacrificial. They did everything for everybody. They never asked for anything in return. Their day was dictated by how well other people's days were going. These people they assigned things to. And so I viewed sacrifice as a huge, like a great element of life, a great trait, a great personality trait. And then my father, he was savvy. He was he started several, now that I look back at it, he ran several different businesses He made sales. He took the time to enjoy the money that he had, and I hated him for that. I thought that was sleazy. I thought that was just like the worst thing in the world. Like, oh, you're all out for the money and you're using that money to buy, he had like a speedboat and like all this type stuff. And those two, I couldn't find a middle ground, so it was like every decision I went into, if there was an opportunity for me to make a sale, I always undercut myself because it's more prestigious. It's more honorable to, fall on the blade. And so for a very long period of my life, that's what I viewed. My grandfather was, from what I perceived growing up, and he genuinely was a great man. But the way I perceived him growing up is that everybody loved him. He did nothing wrong in any way, shape, or form. And then you start getting a little bit older and you start realizing like, oh shit, like those aunts and uncles maybe didn't like Guido as much. And this is why, and I'm like, how the hell could somebody not like, Grandpa Guido? But he was hardworking. If he said something, man, he did it. Busted his hump. One of the things my uncle wrote about my grandfather in his obituary was he was a man that said more with his hands than he did with his mouth. And he did things to show you he loved you. He wasn't one of those guys that was like outright, loving. My mom was the same way. My mom raised 3 kids, busted her hump, working multiple jobs. She was a nurse at St. Elizabeth's, and she would clean houses at night, just to keep a roof over our heads and feed us. And so I had created a code that was essentially like, suffering is good, do everything you can for everybody else. And if you make money, get rid of it as soon as possible. And that code directed a lot of my decisions for a very long time. And then when I would run out of money and be miserable because I didn't have any money, I was pissed off at everybody else for it. Instead of realizing like, well, shit, man, every time you make $500, you find a way to spend $500. It's crazy. So when I started to get a wrap on that, those things still, a lot of my baseline still formulated around family, which eventually grew, from my direct family, into, my now wife. And then obviously, as we kept to go through the years, now my kids, those have always been the root of how I decide on whatever my code is. Now what the rules around that code are and whether they're accurate to the life I wanted, that has definitely changed over the years. However, they were always a strong influence. And a lot of the people around martial arts, especially if you go back to the story I told you, I was very vulnerable when I found martial arts. Those people were massively important to me. And so, I viewed them, they might as well have been family. So that drew a lot of it. It took a lot of time for me to realize a couple of major truths, which I'm still working on, and yet are a massive part of the code that I live by. One is I've got to take care of myself if I want to take care of other people the best way that I possibly can. And that's one that I do really well with in a lot of cases. And I do really terrible with in other cases. I am really, 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 really good at working. I mean, I can work nonstop, no sleep, and I'll do great. And I'm really good at it until I'm not, but I won't realize it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So that's one of those, making it a point to focus on the things that I want, both personally, and then also for my family, and then setting very hard boundaries around those. So that's one of the big ones that I learned, early on. Another one that I learned early on is, or not early on, later, I should say, in life is, act quick, fail, and then figure shit out. And to be completely honest, 9 out of 10 times, it really just doesn't matter. A lot of the decisions I've made where I tried to map it out and have a lot of success with it and make it perfect, it's, even if it failed or did well, it honestly didn't really move the meter one way or the other, and it just didn't matter. And that gave me a lot of freedom. I feel it gave me a lot of freedom around just taking action, having some fun. And if I choose the wrong path, who gives a shit? I still got this one over here I can just get back to. And so that was a really big one for me, and that's one that I wish I would have figured out a hell of a lot earlier on, because I would stew because I really wanted to be there for family and I wanted to make people proud. I would stew over decisions, and they would just wreck me. And then if they didn't go the way I wanted, it was just like absolute shame, and I'm apologizing left and right to everybody. And they're like, I don't even know what you're apologizing for. Like, and I'm like, I'm sorry. So that was a big one too. So like taking care of myself so that I can show up best for the people around me that I care about. Setting really hard boundaries around family. Like I said, in 2016, I traveled, to 30 plus states and did more than 80 seminars. Well, that was the year my son was born. It's my first child. So the first freaking year that he was born, I was booked out for the entirety of the year. And I can vividly remember it was April, and I was getting ready to leave for the airport to go to Denver to teach for 3 days. And I remember sitting in the rocking chair with Maverick, who's my son, and looking at my wife and going, this is the first time that I have not wanted to go. Like, I do not want to get, like, I love travel. I love meeting people. I love teaching. It's like everything to me. And I had no desire. It was the first time that I literally resented the idea of going and teaching. And that made a very big impact on me. And I rode through 2016, because A, I had already made the commitments. But, B, I also realized that it was financially lucrative, kind of. That's a whole nother story, for the family. And it would secure a spot for, Kim and everybody else. But man, like I did not want. So 2017, like I set hard lines. I came back to the business and was like, I'm not working these days. I'm taking at least, one full day off. I'm always going to be here at this time. I'm always doing these things. So that was a big one for me. So like piece number 2 is dedicated boundaries on my time. And then piece number 3 is just acting. If something feels right, just go with it. And then if it doesn't work out, honestly, it's a lesson. There are a couple of really big ones, and then, if you rooted one last one, I don't know if this is necessarily against the grain, by any means, but obsessive just commitment to the fundamentals. I have a tendency to get a little bit too creative in almost everything I do. And then I the same story usually happens, which is like, really, you could have just done this thing and it would have been 100 times better. Like, and I found that in martial arts. I found that in teaching. I found that in doing story work with other people. I found that in journaling with myself. Like I lean towards overcomplicating things. And then I quickly find out that I could have solved this probably 20 to 50% faster if I would have just simplified the process. So those are a couple of them, I guess. That's just, I think those are the ones that come to mind for the most part.
While you were talking, a couple of things came to mind where we had a past interview. She came up with a couple of sayings that I really loved, which one was make mistakes freely. And then the other was that she heard from a 5-year-old from his martial arts class was, if it's not a win, it's a lesson.
Yeah.
So therefore everything's a win. And both you hit on both of those within your code. And that was
if you're not winning, you're learning. That was the way I had always heard it. If you're not winning, you're learning. You either win or you learn. And I'll tell you what, man, that people crack up. Like for instance, I'm competing in jiu-jitsu at IBJJF Worlds, which is, let me be completely disclosure, Masters World. So it's like old people worlds, but I'm a young world. I'm a young old person in the Masters world. But anyway, like I've got several other people that are also competing in it, and like they're very serious, and I get it. I totally get it. So this is I'm just showing the difference between like the way I approach these things. They're very serious, and I've only got X amount of days and I got these many training sessions, and blah, blah, and oh my God, if I lose and all that type of stuff. And I'm like the complete opposite. You see me in competition, like some dude will wipe the mats with me, and afterwards I'll be like, dude, that was awesome. Like, thanks. Like, hey, that was cool. Like, awesome. I'm just gonna go get a beer. I'm good. You know what I mean? Like, like, oh, what's your training schedule? Like, I don't know. I'll probably get on the mats a couple times this week. It'll be fine. Like that type thing. And ever since I did that, my life is so much happier. Like removing expectations around things that, again, just like, it just doesn't matter. Like it really, in the grand scheme of things, what I'm trying to accomplish is, building a great future life for my family and my kids, and, leading people to happiness. And, me being bent out of shape over competition doesn't do either of those. So yeah, it's kind of fun. Not kind of, take out the kind of.
I love how you say that. I'm like, yeah, I hold the provincial snatch record for BC. masters.
Yeah, exactly.
Fine.
Yeah. It's legit.
I'm happy to be the best of the old ladies in my age
Yeah.
group and weight division.
Hey, it's something that hasn't been done yet. You did a thing in competition that no one's done yet.
Exactly.
Own that. Love it.
Well, when you're going through all this and making your codes and having sounds like you've had a lot of lessons and learning. What would you say is some of the more uncomfortable questions that you've asked yourself in order to get there?
Yeah. One of the bigger challenges that I would say there's two really big ones in creating, the code that I want to live by. And on top of that, anytime you create a code, the people that are closest to you, you need them in on it a little bit, right? So if there's a code for the way that I want to interact with my family, I need my wife in on it. And we've got to be a team and we've got to be able to communicate. And that means that I need to understand what her code is and then how we match those things together. And then, I run a business. So if there's something I want to accomplish, a community I want to build, or, expectations I want to set at the business, my team leads need to be on board with that. And then my team leads need to get the rest of the staff on board with that. And then the staff need to get the members on board with that. So there's a lot of communication. That was one of the biggest issues that I had for a very long time. Was I was really, really good at setting the ideas in my head, even writing them out on paper. And then, whether it was a desire to make everybody happy or just a desire to avoid conflict, I avoided the conversations in which getting other people to see why it's important and why we'd want to build it. And then also taking their feedback, towards that, because maybe there's something they see that I don't see. And then even if I did do that and hit that layer, again, out of a desire to avoid conflict and most likely just to make everybody happy, if somebody was breaking those codes, I would avoid it more often than not and hope that it would set off or do, a passive group email or conversation. And so if you bring it back to the way that you phrase that question, what were some of the things that I had to ask myself going into that? And I really had to stare down my issues with conflict, with confrontation and communication. And that's still something that it is something I have made leaps and bounds at, again, especially because of, strong coach and some of the journaling work, and then definitely with Enlifted and the language work. And it's something that I still have miles to go on. So that's a big one. I had to have a lot of conversations around myself around why I had an issue doing that. And whether it was because I lacked confidence in the rule or the code. Did the code not matter? What was the reason for the code? What was the reason for that boundary? And then, if that felt solid, then if I believed in that and the conversation I was having with somebody didn't go the way I wanted, was I willing to part ways with that person for the sake of the code? And that's been a big, I would say a very long journey. One I'm still working on, like I mentioned, I've definitely made headway in. And it's one that still hurts because in recent history, I reached out to Mark because I was a wreck. I had a situation where some people I was very close to had some differences in the way they wanted to run things and stepped away. And a lot of the stories around it were in my head, and there was definitely some communication issues with that. And that one hurt. It hurt a lot, and that's in recent history. So that's been a big one. What are you trying to build? Why? Really going into that why, and why is this that important? And in the case of this being that important, are you willing to educate people on the boundaries, communicate properly with people on the boundaries, and then stick to those boundaries, even if it means that, the people that disagree with it at one time you were pretty close to, maybe want to go off and do something else. And again, it's, negation acknowledged here. It's not because of a splitting or spite. It's simply, hey, if we're out of alignment, we're out of alignment. And that's rough. It's those interpersonal relationships, especially ones that you really build, you got to imagine, I've been doing this for, so February will be 14 years, that I've been involved in the self-defense community, full time. And in 14 years, I've got some members that have been with me at the gym for like 10 to 11 years. And if I spent 8 of those years living by one code and creating a culture around that one code, it's really, really tough to flip that and be able to make people understand, like, hey, look, we're evolving and we're growing. This is the direction we would like to go. And this is why, based off who you are and what we can do for you, why this is important. And when you do that, you get to walk into those conversations ready to walk away from them. Hopefully amicably, but that's not always the case. So that would be some of the bigger ones, that I don't want to say struggled with, I've faced, and continue to face. What do these rules mean to you, and how much are you willing to do to protect them and support them? And essentially, like, how much pain are you willing to face and prepare yourself to face because it's the right thing, or what makes sense for you? I think that's, to me, take out the think, that's the biggest struggle with any of them.
There's so many layers too. Like, as you're learning and growing, you can continuously find another layer to peel back and be like, oh, there's another thing. And I found that can get easier, but at what you were saying too, like the code changing, like me a year ago is a completely different person from me now. Like me 3 years ago wouldn't even recognize, like, we don't look the same at all in any way. If the code were stagnant, like we as people would stay the same, and it leaves little room for growth. So yeah, those are really good points of the code is going to change. And are you willing to ask the questions along the way as it changes?
Well, I truly believe that if you go into it with that, and that's part of the communication with the people that surround you, this is the code now, and it evolves and it changes. And again, if you're looking at like the community aspect of it, it's going to evolve and change. Yes, in this case, often because of me, I'm essentially supposed to be the guide. I'm the CEO, I'm directing, I have the vision. However, it should change because of the community. It should change from your input. If there's something that you feel is out of alignment from what maybe we consider the overall mission, it should be open. It should be known that those things are there to be challenged, and look at that. And I wish I would have known that a lot earlier on and been okay with that idea that if I set a goal, it may not be the right goal. However, in an effort moving towards that goal, I gain clarity on what the actual goal is, right? And that idea versus, FOMO, which is like, well, crap, if I want this thing, what if I can't do that thing? And if that would have been part of the community, the atmosphere, the communication and the discussions earlier on, I truly believe that I would have been a little more, I don't know if brazen's the word. I would have been a little more proactive about making changes a lot sooner when my gut started to feel like those changes needed to happen, instead of waiting until it became a problem. And it's like, well, yeah, this change needs to happen. So that's an incredible point, you're bringing up, is it's the code is constantly evolving, and that's because we're constantly evolving. When I started again, Krav Maga, which like that's, like I told you, that's the turning point that's led to where I'm at right now. And, you know, I truly believe 20 years from now, I'll still be coaching in the self-defense world in some form or fashion, because in this moment in time, it's been 14 years and I am still obsessed with it and I'm still learning. That's the coolest part. It's like, I've been doing this, like, makes you really look back. Like, I have been like neck deep in this world for 14 years. And I'm starting to realize that I know so little. You know what I mean? It's fascinating, just fascinating. Like, I know so much and yet I know so little. And so in that regard, with this, had I known maybe a little bit earlier on, like, you know, things can change and it's okay. And that's part of the point. It's part of the evolution of the code, and had that in there, you know, I really believe like everyone around me would have come up through that, and been able to go into that point. But no matter what, like, your passion drives you. Like, when I started, I was 20, 21. I was in a real jacked up place. I had no money. You know, I just got out of a really bad relationship. You fast forward then a year-ish later, and I meet my wife. My wife was one of the students at my gym at the time. And so I tell people all the time, it's actually written in our code of conduct for instructors, like, no frivolous activity with members, you know, blah, 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 whatever, you know, unless you're going to marry them and have kids. Because I'm batting 1,000 when it comes to sleeping with members. So one for one. We've been together ever since. And the relationship keeps getting better every year. But then I meet her. So now all of a sudden, like, there's this other person that I want to be with. Well, now I'm definitely not the person I was when I was 21 and single, you know what I mean? And now okay, cool. So I'm a different person. And then we get a dog together, and like, oh shit, like, now I got a thing I'm responsible for. So then, like, that's going to change, you know, the way I set boundaries. And then we got a house together. So now I got to take care of the house and do things there. And then that's going to change. Oh wow, shit's getting serious. Like, we moved in together. Like, oh wow. So it's a whole new relationship. So I'm a different person then. And then we get married. That's now we're in it, right? Like, you know, the world I come from, shit, man, you get married. You know what I mean? There's no backing out of that bad boy. You know, it is what it is. But and then now I got kids. Now that changes. Not the same person. And then, you know, now, well, shit, now the business doesn't just need to support Kim and I going on vacation, having a couple of drinks and enjoying things. Like, now, crap, I got to focus on, like, my kids' future and making sure that they're stable and they're secure. So then that changes you and evolves you in the way that you even view your business. And then all of a sudden you start taking on more employees, and you're like, well, shit, now I'm responsible for them. I want them to have a future in this. I want them to be able to get what I got out of it. And that changes the way you view your business. And then, like, just all of these things. And then, you know, COVID happens, right? And it's like, oh, cool. Now it's a completely different, like, you start realizing, like, man, all this stuff I was stressed out about, like, doesn't matter, like, at all. And that changes the way you look at it. You come out of that. And so in 14 years, I've had, I don't know, you know, call it 10 major milestones that have shifted me. The code doesn't work anymore. You know what I mean? Like, if you look at it and you go, like, this is what I'm going to live and die by. It's like, yeah, man, until you get married and have kids and a business and you're supporting other people underneath you. And then $1,000 a month to pay for beer in your house isn't enough, you know? It changes the way you view it. It's crazy. And so being taught that early on, I can't recall early on somebody teaching me goal setting and teaching me that. And I don't know if that's just because I wasn't exposed to it, but I had seen several people teach goal setting. I mean, in the fitness world, it's like everything, like goals, goals, goals. Even in the martial arts world, it's like, when are you going to be a black belt? Like that type thing. But they were very one-dimensional. It was very much set your sights on something and go get it. You know, there wasn't a lot of discussion around, hey, set your sights on something, go get it. And guess what? You might decide you don't want it anymore, and that's okay. You know what I mean? Like, go get the next thing and move. Because you're not the same freaking person. So the code can't be the same. The goals most likely aren't going to be the same. And that was a fascinating concept to me. You know, I wish I would have learned that a hell of a lot earlier on, especially like 20 to 30, like 18 to 30 years old. I feel like you have like 5 different life changes in that span. You know, like, let's be real. You're not a real adult until you've had those struggles through like the 20s, you know, like legally you're an adult at 18, but you're just, you know, just enough to get in trouble. You know, and so that, I mean, good Lord, that's such an impactful time, you know, to make big, bold decisions and screw them up and learn from it and be given the permission to do that. I think that's where I'm going with this, like the permission to evolve and change and want to go other places and not have to make, you know, the good old fashioned American dream, go to school, get a degree and, you know, work enough hours to pay your bills. Like, woohoo. Like, oh, man, like go have some fun. So that's me rambling, but I got my point.
Yeah, no, I love what you say about goal setting, because I mean, I do goal setting with my clients, and it's something, you know, that I learned from the Strong Coach program doing our 10-year goals. And one of the things I often tell my clients that I'm working with the goal setting, to use like the pirate analogy, like we're setting our sails in a direction, right? Like which way do we want to be heading? The destination, it's probably going to change. That's fine. But we're still setting our sails in that direction where we want to go. And we're following whatever passion that's creating this goal.
Yeah.
And, you know, because we are dynamic, our goals are dynamic. That's why we get to revisit them every, you know, 90 days. But if we don't set a long-term vision or direction that we want our life to head, how do we know what actions that we need to be taking right now? Right.
Yeah.
So without that long-term vision, we are udderless. Is that a good boating term? Like, we're just swirling around in letting the waves carry us.
Just throw the nautical terms out.
Yeah.
Most of us don't
Trying to
know.
be as nautical as possible.
Yeah, just say mooring and some other things. Starboard, you know.
Yeah. Port.
You know, I was listening to I've been on a big Jordan Peterson kick lately, and I was listening to a podcast between him and Jocko, and he made a really cool analogy the way that he said it. It was just another layer to this, and that's, you know, when you're, you know, what the one thing he says is you won't hit something you don't aim at, right? So like double negation in that case. But you know, you got to aim at something to hit it. But what was really fascinating, I thought, where he took it even one layer deeper, which was like, look, if your life needed to go right, you didn't know it needed to go right, but your life needed to go right, and you went left, you'll find out really quick left wasn't the right direction. And now you know left wasn't the right direction. So you've made it farther heading right by specifically heading left with intention than you would have if you would have stayed in the same damn place. And that was another, like, to me, that opened up another layer of that discussion, which was like, look, like if I have two choices, you know, and right is one of them and left is one of them, and I make the wrong choice, that's a good thing, because now I know that was the wrong choice and I can work towards the right one, or one that's maybe, you know, to stay with the strong coach, we're a little more in alignment, right? Finding and seeking accuracy. And I thought I found it very neat that he took it the complete opposite, like made it a point to be like, you can be going the absolute opposite direction, and that's good. Because once you figure out that wasn't the right direction, you now know that's not the right direction. I found that very cool, like another little way to explain that concept. And I got to say, like, I love that you're doing that, because I wish, like, going through the Strong Coach and then watching the Enlifted community grow the way that it has. And admittedly, I'm my time and attention is focused in a lot of other places. So I'm working on being as, you know, participatory in the community as I can, you know, and I will get back to it. However, I creep from a distance constantly, and right, like I'm just peering at everybody like, oh man, like I'm always seeing the events and seeing all the comments everybody's making. And it really is uplifting and really empowering to know that there's those kind of people now out there for people to get information off of, you know what I mean? Like when I was deep in level 1 and level 2, I was intentionally going out and doing dedicated story work sessions with people, like with my members and with other people, and really diving deep with them. And that was to get really good at that. Now I don't, my time and attention is elsewhere now. However, I have that skill set. And so in those moments, even in group settings, I can access that stuff. You know, same thing with goal setting. When I was going through Strong Coach, I took my team leads through the entire process on a 2-week delay. So I was always 2 weeks ahead, and I would take them through the process so that I could get better at it and understand it and be able to get there. if I had had someone that had any type of knowledge about that and had those pieces of advice, even just simple things like removing soft talk and flipping negations into affirmations, and then the idea that goals can evolve. When I was talking to people who were informing me about goal setting, man, like I wonder. And that's fascinates me from a personal experience standpoint, because it's like y'all are out there, I'm going to include myself in that community, the size of that community that continually keeps growing and is now impacting 5 or 10 to 100 more people, depending on how long like that's, to me, is so exciting. I look back at the 20-year-old version of me and I yearn for that. Like that kind of guidance, like for you to be doing goal setting and being able to tell people that, like, shit, man, when I started fitness, the goals were, how much weight do you want to lose? And that's the conversations I had with people. And then like, oh man, like, why is that the number? And then it's like, oh man, that was your pre-pregnancy weight. Ooh, let's talk about that psychology. And then it's like, is that really what we want? And it's just fascinating when you understand that deeper layer. So I say this as a huge shout out to both the Strong Coach and the Elliptic community. And what I imagine is happening with, TCS and all that type of stuff. I don't know enough about it, but, it's super exciting. I love it. It is one of the biggest impacts that I am seeing, in the world. And it's coming a lot from the fitness and wellness community. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, you have fitness instructors. I'm going to put myself in that category, like fitness and self-defense instructors that are like willing to sit across from you and talk about like deep stories. You know what I mean? Like, gosh, the impact you can make at that pass. Like, anyway. So I'm very excited to hear, other that I love seeing what y'all are doing. Like, even just with this podcast, right? Just having these types of conversations. I feel like they're not had enough. Right, we need to have it more. So
absolutely, yeah.
That was my pump up.
I do my story work mostly with my nutrition clients. I work with women on nutrition, and it's funny. I have some clients where we hardly talk about food at all. Like, there's no need to. You don't need me to tell you to eat more broccoli and less Twinkies. Like, we don't need to talk about that. And the story work that we do. One of my clients was like, how come nutrition is having more of an impact than my therapy sessions? I'm like, just very practical work that we do to work through those old stories so that we can move forward. And, I put it under the banner of nutrition so I can tell people to eat more protein while at the same time. But, it is interesting, life work, really. And I think for me, it was more of hesitation to call myself a life coach, because that term feels tainted to me. But really, I think that is what the Unlifted coaches are doing.
Yeah. Well, and what's neat about it is like, so yes, I've been a CrossFit affiliate owner since 2008. I've immersed myself in kettlebells, powerlifting, strength conditioning, rehabilitation, everything there. And I'm very knowledgeable in that side of things. However, if you look at my Instagram, I'm the self-defense guy. I really don't talk that much about the fitness side of things. Right. And what's beautiful about that is, like, you look at the Elliptic community, and whether it's a nutrition coach or a yoga instructor or a fitness instructor, or in my case, primarily a self-defense instructor, or like my dude Brady, that's like the music, the spiritual DJ, right? Like, oh man, I had the pleasure of mentoring him through Strong Coach, and that was just the coolest experience. Yeah.
Very cool.
But so it's the gateway drug, right? Like, it's like, hey man, I want to come to you for self-defense. And I'm like, yes, awesome. I'm going to help you with self-defense. And then, like, in the back of my mind, and I'm going to help you with all that trauma, bro. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we are going to go deep, right? I'm going to make you like physically strong, and we're going to cry. You know what I mean? I'm not saying this to you right now, because I have yet to prep you for it. However, like, in the back of my mind, that's where I'm at. Like, oh man, we're going to get deep.
Gonna make you feel those feelings.
Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's so cool. 'Cause like, you don't know what you don't know.
Mhm.
And so when you go to somebody and you say like, okay, like, I realize I'm unhappy because of my body and I'm associating that to nutrition. So I'm going to go find a nutrition coach. And then all of a sudden you find like a genuine support system to
Mhm.
like create pleasure or like pleasure and enjoyment in your own life. Like, come on, and then for me in the self-defense world, it's, the fitness world has this too, for sure. However, the self-defense world I feel is a little more intense because it's predominantly built upon toughness, our industry. And you want to talk about a lot of people with a lot of internal stories, all these freaking tough guys, that, and you're just sitting there going like, oh man, like I want to help you. You know what I mean? Like when people like, I don't get them as much anymore. And I truly believe it's because of my work with Enlifted, because I present my information a lot more openly, where a lot of people go like, I'm going to show you this thing and this is the way to do it. I approach a lot of if you watch any of my videos and things like that online, I approach it very exploratory. Hey, listen, this has worked really well for me. These things I've done, have some fun with it. Let me know what you think. So I don't get a lot of, what you would maybe call haters, or let's just say they're a little more quiet. However, like when someone does, to use the young term, like try to flex on me, I'm always like, oh man, like, can I help you? Like, what can we do? You want to grab a coffee sometime? Like, let's talk about this. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, like need a hug, and not like an aggressive, I'm trying to tap you out hug. Like, can I give you a hug, girl?
Tell daddy who hurt you.
That might not go over so well, but
or some variation of that.
Yeah, some variation of that, yeah. But it's fascinating that the real, outside of the obvious physical harm that can come to somebody in a violent situation, which I firmly believe like everyone should be training in self-defense. Like I said, it's the reason that I'm in there, and like make it a big part of it, me personally. And the physical skill sets do matter. However, you can have all the physical skill sets that you want. If you don't have the emotional ability and resilience to access those physical tools under duress, they're not going to be any good to you. If on the flip side of that, if you're so emotionally driven that when adrenaline does take over and your emotions start to spin, you lack the ability to get in there and calm down that nervous system and get at least regulate a little bit with that parasympathetic. If you don't have that, then yeah, you may be tough and you may be strong and you may be aggressive moving forward, but you may also make really, really poor decisions that get you killed because you run out into danger, without any thought, any strategic kind of backing on that. And that fascinates me because, like, one of the key examples, a very easy conversation that happens a lot of times here in the US, and I imagine it happens in Canada, and just a little different. But is the whole like, oh, if anybody ever broke in my house, I'd go out and whoop their ass, or I'd get my gun and go find them and shoot them. And it's just like, okay, emotionally that makes sense because you want to, this is your territory and you got to protect your territory and all that type of stuff. Like emotionally, I could see how that could make sense. Strategically, that makes no fucking sense in any way, shape, or form. If your goal is to live life, show up tomorrow, then the idea would be to lower the amount of risk as much as possible, right? So get rid of any risk that you can control in any way, shape, or form. So with the exception that I need to go out to protect my children, if I am in a room with a door shut and everything that I actually give a shit about, so in this case, it would be like me and my kids and my wife are in this room, then I'm just going to stay in this room. And in my case, I am a legal firearm holder. I'm a firearms instructor. I'm going to point a gun at the door. I'm going to call 911. I'm going to let the cops come and do their job. And anything that comes through the door, it doesn't identify themselves as a law enforcement officer, I'll shoot them if they come through the door. Why? Like, who gives a shit? Take the TV. I don't care. I got homeowners insurance, man. I'll buy a better one. Like that shit's giving me problems anyway. Like but the emotional drive, if you don't have your emotions under control, you make poor decisions. And self-defense, this is what people don't realize, or often I find in my experience, people underestimate the fact that a lot of self-defense is decision-making. And the better that I can control decision-making, the more likely I survive or completely avoid self-defense situations, right? Like one of the first things we teach people is don't go stupid places with stupid people to do stupid things, and you'll avoid 85% of potential self-defense threats. You know what I mean? Like a lot of violence happens where, you know, younger males come together in groups. So then you have the whole idea of like group culture, influence, and then if there's any influence of alcohol and drugs and things like that, like it's just the way that it is. And like I know my city, I know where I don't go, and if I do go, I need to be a little more pertinent about what's going on. And I know where, you know, okay, I go there, but I don't go there after X amount of time. You know, it's always a joke in Youngstown, and downtown Youngstown, you know, the unknown rule was don't stop at red lights if you don't have to, because downtown Youngstown, you stop at red lights, at least during a certain period of time. If you were to stop at a red light, there's a solid chance you get carjacked. You know what I mean? So if it's 10 o'clock at night and there's nobody around and there's a red light, drive through the red light. And I tell you right now, if a cop saw you do it, they would be like, yeah, you'd be dumb to stop at that red light. Like, don't stop at the damn red light. So, you know, we have all the information we need to get out of that stuff. But if I'm emotionally driven, well, F that, I go wherever I want type mentality, you make poor decisions. So people underestimate the impact of having emotional strength, emotional intelligence when it comes to self-defense, and how decision-making plays a huge part of that. And then even further past that, the biggest scar that will be left after a violent encounter is not visible. It's usually internal. So the thing that is going to lead potentially to shutting down, gaining weight, which is then going to relieve to you becoming even more stressed, because now not only are you, you know, don't want to be out and be active, and you're feeling senses of anxiety and depression, but now you're also putting on weight. So then you feel bad about yourself about that. And then all of a sudden you're isolating yourself. And the thing that's going to lead to you having, you know, less joy in life and being able to bounce back from those situations is the emotional aspect of it. You know, it's, and you can talk tough guy all you want, but if it was just about puffing up your chest and burying it down with adrenaline, then we wouldn't have an issue with PTSD and veterans that are coming back from war. It's just the way that it would be, right? So violence, I tell people this all the time, everyone that experienced violence has changed. Mm-hmm. The degree in which you're changed may be different. How you're triggered may be different. How you then move forward and handle it may be different. But everyone that is touched by violence is changed in some form or fashion. It either changes a stereotype in the way you view the world and you view other people. It changes the way you view the world in a sense where it actually shuts down the way you approach certain things in the world, or amps you up the way you approach certain things in the world, or it can lead to very severe issues. And that the stigma around the fact that, you know, dealing emotionally with things is, you know, not tough, or, you know, like the weak way out or something like that, is the biggest crock of shit. And if people put as much time, people that were in the self-defense world put as much time into clearing their head and getting their head right and getting their hearts where they needed at, they would be better fighters. Mm-hmm. And that's it's like when that door opened up for me and I started to realize how much calmer I am when I fight people, how much more I can pick up on, how much better I control my breathing, how I'm significantly better at removing myself from situations where I know or have a higher likelihood of bad things happening. All of that type stuff. Like, I'm a way better fighter, and I'm not, you know, negation acknowledged, I'm not saying I'm the best fighter in the world. And there's some people that are going to watch this podcast that could definitely whoop my ass pending on the skill set, or I should say the rule set. But, you know, try me. I'm a good fighter. And I'm a good fighter because I will learn. You know, you go back to our lesson about, you know, you either lose or you either win or you learn. But I will learn, because when I lose, I'm not emotionally driven to it. I know what I'm fighting for. I know what I'm going to do if those things go wrong. And I know what I want to get out of every interaction I get to. And I just avoid fighting like the plague, man. I got in way more fights before I trained than I did after I trained. Mm-hmm. I can tell you tons of fun, exciting stories about, I headbutted this guy and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And buddy tried to fight this guy and I kicked his ass and fought 3 guys. Like, I can tell you all those stories and they're all stupid. They're all stupid. Every one of them. Right. You know, I won a hell of a lot more than I lost, but the fact that I didn't die when I lost was pure luck. You know what I mean? And I'm a way, way, way smarter person. I'm a lot more emotionally intelligent. And I'm a hell of a better fighter because of it. And the ones that I know that have that shit in check and do the emotional work just as much as they do the physical work, those are dangerous people, and dangerous in a good way. Those are the people I don't mess around with. The ones that puff up their chest and run their mouth are usually the ones that get licked pretty quick. The ones that just, let shit roll off of them, and they're a little quieter, and they also have the physical skill set. Like, that's the dude I'm afraid of if I ever tried to step on his shit, because he's got it. And then afterwards, they most likely have the skill set to keep themselves healthy and keep themselves present in the world, and keep themselves, with a mission or a purpose, to get past that moving forward. And it's an area where you see it a lot in women's self-defense programs. And you see it a lot less in general discussion around self-defense. And that's one thing that I'm really doing my best to start changing, is that emotional intelligence piece and putting in the work. Because I'll tell you right now, I have taken physical abuse in training, and I'm too dumb to stop. You know what I mean? Like, I told you, like, I'll work. I'm a workhorse. I took the first black belt test I ever took for Krav Maga. I had separated my shoulder like 2 weeks before my test. And, it was like, hey man, you need to rehab this. Definitely don't take that test. And I was like, cool, I'll come see you after the test and we can start rehabbing it. You know what I mean? But that test was just shy of 7 hours nonstop of very aggressive. I mean, we're talking like full contact fighting, and there was a really small portion in there where there was like a live knife involved, and then they brought in fresh bodies to fight us. I mean, it was a whole thing. And I've survived that. I've survived grueling, 3 to 5 day trainings, where they're like 8 hours a day of just physical movement nonstop, like back and forth. And I will tell you right now that nothing has brought me to my knees like story work, especially with England. Holy shit with that guy. Like, I remember walking into my level 1 story work session with him and being like, I just got a strong coach. I'm already doing story work. Like, I got my shit in order. Like, he has nothing he can find to get me. Like, 20 minutes into that call, bawling my eyes out about like my dad and my grandfather and my brother and like all these types of things. I'm like, what the fuck is this? But I'll tell you what, man, I came out of that. Every session I come out of, man, like, if you can face it, you come out of the other side of that, a hell of a lot better fighter, in that case. For anybody listening that's in this world, man, the emotional work is significantly more difficult, and the ROI is huge for me. So
yeah, my session was 90 minutes of crying. I think we just started Zoom and I was crying. We didn't even talk yet. It's just from knowing what we were about to talk about, because what I had written down. But yeah, it was impactful for sure.
Yeah, it hits you hard, man. It really does. It's powerful though.
Totally. So where can our listeners go to find out more about you?
For sure. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Jannetti Aaron. That's JANNETTIAARON. 2 N's, 2 T's in Jannetti. People.
And 2 A's in Aaron.
Yes, and 2 A's in Aaron. Yeah. So all of the doubles throughout that. Oh, it's my dogs. So yeah, you'll find me on Instagram and Facebook. I'm primarily active on Instagram. Most of my Instagram just pushes my Facebook. You can find everything about Endeavor at Endeavor DCF, as in like dog, cat, fish, on both, again, Instagram and Facebook. You can find us at endeavordcf.com. And then the active shooter response is our program. If you want to check out the book, How to Survive an Active Shooter, an honest look at your role in the age of mass violence, you can get that up on Amazon. And then the Knife Control Concepts program is our big one. That's where I'm booked out, I think, through July already next year.
Wow.
Yeah, I've got 2 seminars next month, 1 in December, 2 in January, 2 in February, 1 in March, April, May, June, and July. So that's the next big program. And then resilience training in February for the resilience workshop with Brandon and Mark. So that's
where's the next one?
Richmond.
Okay.
Yeah. So I believe that Kim will be releasing information on that. This is the first time I don't need to run the admin, which
nice.
Like I will take that negation all day, because it's like very exciting for me to just to be able to show up and just, do what I love to do. So But yeah, so then check that out. So you can find me all over the internet at interwebs at those spots.
And then how would you recommend our listeners start their own pirate journey?
Oh man, that's a great question. Journaling was the biggest simple tool that was given to me in the last few years. I would say right out of the gate, start to sit down, and if you wanted to come up with a code, start to sit down and write out the things that matter most to you. Or if it's hard for people to think about themselves, then picture someone that you admire and what are the traits you admire about that person? I know early on that was a trick that helped me a lot was, okay, I've put my grandfather on this massive pedestal, but why? And I started to identify those pieces. And I also challenge you to then be willing to tear those pieces down and challenge them. However, as a good start, if it's easier for somebody listening to I hate to say it, but project out and find some answers that way, find somebody that you look up to and admire and make sure it's, for the right reasons, and start to identify why you're impacted by that person or what you admire about them. I feel like that's a really good place to start, to identify a couple of things there. But that would be the biggest thing, is spend some time in a book, in a journal, spend, even if it's just 10 to 15 minutes every day, dumping thoughts out of your head. That's this, you see our little library behind us, all of our bookshelves. Where is it? I'm trying to point it out. Like this section right here that looks like all like black, and then this section up here, like those are literally just used journals. So like I've gone through, holy crap, since the Strong Coach, I've gone through so many journals. But
me too.
Lance's are both sitting next to me.
Exactly. So start writing things down. James Clear, one of our buddies out here, he lives in Columbus, very well known. I wrote the book Atomic Habits. When we interviewed him on our podcast, one of the things he said was writing is thinking. Because if you're just in your head the whole time, it's very difficult to actually capture thoughts and analyze them, where he thought that writing forced you to slow things down. And I really like that line. So write. Even if you don't know what you're writing about, just start writing. That would be my suggestion.
Love it. So our final question, very important question. Some might say the most important question. Do you know any pirate jokes?
Oh man. Dude. Yes, but I got to think of them. Oh my gosh.
We do have one prepared if you can't come up.
I think
because I wrote
you
the
wrote
two down.
two. Yeah.
Yeah. But what cracked me up was when I saw that on there, I got really excited and I started looking up pirate jokes, and then I fell down a rabbit hole. It's like 3 hours of and then like was just setting it off there. But the two that I wrote in there are like two of the ones that I actually laughed when I read them, and I was like, these are so dumb and awesome. I love them. So if you got them in front of you, those are the ones that I would pop out.
So I will read you one of them only because the other one is literally the joke that Ben Joy brought. The last episode we just recorded.
That makes sense because Ben was my lead instructor for the Strong Coach. So we're akin to each other. All right, go for it.
So why is pirating so addictive?
Why?
They say once you lose your first hand, you get hooked.
That's what I'm talking about. It's great. I love dad jokes, and like pirate versions of dad jokes are the best.
Totally.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Absolutely. And to find out what the other joke was, listen to the episode before this one.
Yeah, go back and listen to Ben.
Walker.
He's got a cool
that means
story.
You have to listen to the whole episode because the joke is at the end.
Skipping to the end.
I love it.
Awesome. Well, this has been so great talking to you, Aaron, and catching up, because I feel like it's been a million years since I've actually seen you on a Zoom.
While. Yeah, it's been a while.
So yeah, thank you for coming on and chatting with us today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be a part of this. It really is. I've seen the guest list to this point. I was very excited to see y'all connect with Ashley Schaefer. She's an incredible human.
Yep. She's one of yours, right?
Yeah, she's a huge part of our community. She's an incredible part of it. So I really appreciated seeing that. So it's an honor to be part of the group that's in here and to be a part of this. So thank you both.
It's rock and roll, guys. There are no rules. This one goes to 11.